We've got big and controversial news playing out internationally right now. Because you had South Africa presenting their genocide case against Israel at the ICJ, the UN's top court, the International Court of Justice. And I also want to note this, it's very important. What we're talking about today is not the end of the story. Because you had South Africa presenting their arguments today. Israel has denied the allegations. U.S. Secretary of State has described the allegations as meritless. Though also notably, while he's trying to push for Israel to scale back their intensity, and Israel in this court will present their side tomorrow. But with all that said, it brings us to Adila Hassim. She's a lawyer representing South Africa. She laid out the country's case in explicit detail, going step by step down the UN's 1948 Genocide Convention Treaty, which defines genocide as an act committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. And that also including not just direct killing and maiming, but also forcing conditions where life isn't sustainable, preventing births, and forcing children to assimilate into different groups. And I'll largely just be hitting her highlights, so if you want to watch the full thing, I'm linking to it in the description. First and foremost, the lawyers for South Africa clearly condemned Hamas and its actions, saying,
South Africa unequivocally condemned the targeting of civilians by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups and the taking of hostages on the 7th of October 2023.
And then regarding the bombing of Gaza, Hassim said that this has been clear, calculated, and extensive.
The level of Israel's killing is so extensive that nowhere is safe in Gaza. As I stand before you today, 23,210 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces during the sustained attacks over the last 3 months. At least 70% of whom are believed to be women and children. In the first 3 weeks alone, following 7 October, Israel deployed 6,000 bombs per week. At least 200 times it has deployed 2,000-pound bombs in southern areas of Palestine designated as safe. These bombs have also decimated the north, including refugee camps. 2,000-pound bombs are some of the biggest and most destructive bombs available.
But Hassim then also saying it's not just the bombing of Gazans.
Israel's conduct has been deliberately calculated to cause widespread hunger, dehydration, and starvation. Israel's campaign has pushed Gazans to the brink of famine. An unprecedented 93% of the population in Gaza is facing crisis levels of hunger.
She also went on to describe the alleged mass kidnappings of Gazans.
Large numbers of Palestinian civilians, including children, are arrested, blindfolded, forced to undress, and loaded onto trucks, taken to unknown locations.
Hassim then goes on to argue that even Israel's first evacuation order on October 13, which required the evacuation of over 1 million people, she says was genocidal.
Entire hospitals were required to evacuate even newborn babies in intensive care. The order required them to evacuate the north to the south within 24 hours. The order itself was genocidal. It required immediate movement, taking only what could be carried, while no humanitarian assistance was permitted, and fuel, water, and food, and other necessities of life had deliberately been cut off. It was clearly calculated to bring about the destruction of the population.
Hassim also goes on to claim that Israel is intentionally forcing the collapse of the healthcare systems in Palestine.
Israel is blocking the delivery of life-saving aid, including essential medical kits for delivering babies, in circumstances where an estimated 180 women are giving birth in Gaza each day. Of these 180 women, the WHO warns that 15% are likely to experience pregnancy or birth-related complications and need additional medical care. That care is simply not available.
Now, with all this, again, I want to stress that Israel is going to respond in UN court tomorrow. With the AP reporting, as a sign of how seriously they regard the case, Israeli leaders have taken the rare step of engaging with the court to defend their international reputation, noting that Israel often boycotts international tribunals or UN investigations, saying they are unfair and biased. Now, with all this, we have gotten a glimpse of the country's rebuttal so far. An Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesman saying on Twitter, "Today we were witness to one of the greatest shows of hypocrisy in history, compounded by a series of false and baseless claims," calling the South African lawyers Hamas's representatives in the court and saying they ignored the fact that Hamas uses the civilian population in Gaza as human shields and operates from within hospitals, schools, UN shelters, mosques, and churches with the intention of endangering the lives of the residents of the Gaza Strip. And Prime Minister Netanyahu saying, "Today we saw an upside-down world. Israel is accused of genocide while it is fighting against genocide," saying Israel is fighting murderous terrorists who carried out crimes against humanity. But with all that said, I do want to note that a lot of what we're seeing play out over these next 48 hours, a lot of it has to do with pressure and public conversation. Because at the very top, there are two ways things could go. They lose, it's done, it's dead. But even if they win, there's a lot of buts. The first, which Reuters and the New York Times hit on, is that we are likely years away from a final ruling. We did have a former UN chairman on a commission involving Israel's previous military operations in Gaza telling the New York Times, all that South Africa has to do to win a provisional measures order is convince the court that its charge of genocide is plausible. But even then, if the court does side with South Africa, if the AP reporting, although the court's findings are considered binding, it was unclear whether Israel would heed any order to halt the fighting. And noting if it doesn't, it could face UN sanctions, although those may be blocked by a US veto. And again, there's reason to believe that a veto would come in, because even before they presented their case today, John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, he had already denounced South Africa's case, calling it meritless, counterproductive, and completely without any basis in fact whatsoever. As we wait to see what happens next, both the reactions and the fallouts to what we saw today, as well as Israel's presentation tomorrow, I gotta ask you, what are your thoughts on what we're seeing right now?